Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Programming in Access 2013. My name is Steve Bishop, and today we're going to be continuing our series on VBA, or Visual Basic for Applications. We're still going to be working on some of those keywords or magic words in Access that we will find ourselves using all the time, and these are the objects or collections or methods that we will find ourselves using frequently in our Access projects. Today's word is CurrentDB. And let's take a look. All right, so on our CurrentDB, we've got a couple of different buttons, just like I had in the last video here, that we're going to walk through and see what each one of these does. So on the CurrentDB, there's this property or collection called containers. And the containers are very similar to some of the other things that we were looking at. Remember, we were iterating through modules or forms or tables in the current project when we were looking at the current project collection. Well, the CurrentDB object also has these containers collection here, which is kind of a way to go through just about everything in here. And each one of these containers will be something like a container name will be like a table. So just to show you how this code is working here, I'm dimming a couple of integers. One is I and one is j because I'm going to open up each container and spit out what the name of the container is down to our immediate window. Then once we have a container, we're going to actually again iterate through all of the documents inside of that container. So you can see we're looking at the CurrentDB containers, and then there are documents inside of that container. I'm going to get a count of them, and again I'm doing my -1 because we're starting out as a zero base for both the number of containers and the number of documents inside of each container. So we're kind of iterating through twice. We're iterating through, like I said, just the parent level, which is the container name, or the container, which has a name, and then inside of each container there are documents, so we need to iterate through the documents. Okay? So let's start here. The first one is going to be data access pages, and data access pages does not have any documents in it currently, so there's no document name to print out. The next container is databases, and we will see that msysdb is the database that comes up. That is the default database, the default local database name. Okay. Then there's also summary info, which is kind of information. It's kind of metadata on the sysdb. Then there's a user-defined database, and now we skip up to the next container, which is forms. In the forms, there are, of course, FRM customer addresses, FRM employees, FRM form, and FRM login. Those are those forms that we had created. Oops, let me go to the right location here. Form, customer addresses, employees, form, and login. So you can see those are those forms that we've been building. Okay. Next container is modules, which we see the CLS customer, CLS test, and the mod test, just like we saw with the current project. Okay, so this is a very, very similar way of iterating through those objects like we did in current project. Then there are relationships, and you'll see these are unique identifiers. And if we look inside of, if we go to the Database Tools tab, there's that relationships panel here that we were setting up the connection between our different tables. We have the the many-to-manys and the one-to-many relationships that we were setting up before. But there are some relationships that the system actually has internally, as well as these ones that are being defined through these global unique identifiers. These global unique identifiers are just automatically given to the name of the relationship that indicate those lines that we saw in that relationships panel. So let me just pull that back up real quick. Each one of these things is a relationship and therefore has a unique ID to it. Okay, and then we also see those system relationships that are in there. All right. Next up, we're going to see the reports. And in the reports, we've just got the one report, just called report 1. So then we're moving on to scripts. Now scripts are macros. I'm not really sure why they're named something different here. Scripts are basically those macros that you could build if you went up here to the database tools. You wanted to make a macro, or there we go. There's the create tab. You can create a macro here. And those are those again, macros are not something that we're going to be talking about in this video series because I don't really find any use for them since I can do everything in VBA. All right, then we have sysrel, which to be honest with you, I don't really know exactly what that is. I imagine it's probably something to do with maybe different types of users that are able to access the database. I'm not really sure. Never really had to investigate that. Tables. We got some temporary tables that access keeps as system tables and hidden in the background. And we'll iterate through several of those before we start seeing some of the ones that we have access to. Here's the system tables that we were able to access because I remember I turned on the hidden attributes. I turned that on so we could actually see them. So we see the hidden objects and we see the system objects. Okay. So we're iterating through all of those, but then we will eventually start hitting on, notice that we get queries. And this is kind of an interesting thing. Queries are actually listed in the tables container. Very odd. I'm not really entirely sure why that was done. I don't know if that's a mistake. I don't know if previous versions have that particular issue, but I know in 2013 they are in the tables container. But we're starting to hit those tables that that are user created here. Okay, so that's how you can iterate through the containers and go then through the documents that are within each container. All right. Next up, let's take a look at create query def. Create a query def. Let's see here. So I want to create a query def. Well, what you can do is you can actually create a query, and in this case, I'm going to use again CurrentDB dot create query def, and that's going to create a query called QRY employees, and the query is going to be made up of this SQL query, which is select star from table 1 employees. Now we haven't gone over the syntax at this point here, but I'm going to show you that within each one of these queries, you see query cust address with type, query cust addresses. These are queries that we can actually open up and take a look at. We've got our design panel that we're used to seeing, but if I right-click on the open window here, anywhere in the open space, see this SQL view? If I click on that, you'll see that there is this complicated query language that is basically going and it's kind of like another code. It's a different language that's being spoken to a database in order to extract information or update information or add information or even delete information. That's those different types of make table, append, update, etc. So this is what we call a select query, and it's gathering information from these different sources here. And these are the different fields that it's going to be getting information from. And then here are the tables that are involved. And there's something called a join that's being done, and you have to specify what the criteria is that you're joining those tables on. And then there's a where clause, which is helping to filter out the data that you're pulling. And we will get more in depth into this, but essentially this query language that's in the background here is what makes up what we see in the design view. And we can specify that here when we're defining a new query. When we're creating a query, we actually specify the query language, okay? Because there's really not much of a way for us to indicate to access this design view or this design layout. We have to specify instead this query language in the background, okay? No, I don't want to say that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and create a query called QRY employees, and it's going to be made up of this select star from table 1 employees. And we do that, and now if I open up over here, notice in my queries it doesn't show up. I got to hit F5, and now you'll see query employees. And if I go into the design view of this, we'll see it doesn't really look all that fancy. I don't even have any fields listed here, but if I look in the background here, we can see there's my select star from table 1 employees, which is exactly what I put down here in select star from table 1 employees. And trust me, this works, even though it doesn't look like it. I can actually view it and it opens up my employees. All right, so that's how that works. Now, let's move on to the query defs. Because now I've got that query employees created. But there are other ways that we can create a query besides using the create query def function here. This is a create query def method that is on the CurrentDB object. Here what we can do is we can actually create an object that is a query def, that is a new query def, I should say. But before we go and we create this, I want to go ahead and remove that one query that we already had. So I'm going to go in to the query defs collection, and I'm going to run the delete method to delete the QRY employees. So when I do that, and just to show you here, if I go back over here, you'll see the query employees is now gone. Okay, so you can actually access those query defs of where those queries are located by using this CurrentDB query defs collection, and then I'm running the delete method, which requires one parameter, which is query employees. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a QDef, which is a new query def, and as part of the QDef, I'm going to set the property of the QDef or query def to select ID, first name, last name, username from table 1 employees. This is a very similar thing. Again, this is that SQL language, okay, the query language that we're going to be using to build our SQL statement. And when we do that, we also need to give our query def a name, which again is that QRY employees. And then we need to append. So we've got this query that's floating out there in memory. We've given it a SQL string, and then we've given it a name. Now we have to add that new query def to our collection of query defs. So that's using the append method. And the append method requires one parameter, which is the QDef that we created up here. Okay? When we do that, now we have, if I refresh again, there's that QRY employees query again. But this time when I go in and take a look at it, you can see since I specified those field names specifically and I didn't use this what we call a star syntax, we have those specific fields that are listed here. And if I look in the SQL view, you can see there's my ID, my first name, last name, username, and from table 1 employees. Access basically took my query that I wrote in here, and which is just select ID, first name, last name, username from table 1 employees, and it got a little bit more specific. It appended the table 1 employees dot in front of each one of those fields that I selected. And again, we will be getting much more into the SQL language a little bit later on, but I just want to show you you can actually create your queries right from within the VBA code. All right, so then if we just go ahead and run that query, just want to show you, we get just the information that I selected here, the ID, the first name, last name, and the username. All right, so that's good there. Now we can do something very similar with table defs. Notice we had the query defs. We can also create table defs. So let's take a look here. Now creating a table is a bit more involved because as you recall when we were creating tables, we have to specify a field name and a data type, right, for each one of these parts of the table. So it's a little bit more complicated than just writing out like we had in the query def where we were, just passing along a string. we actually have to define some fields in our table. So let's see how this all works. First, I'm going to go ahead and create a table definition, or I'm going to create a variable object in memory called tdef. And then I'm going to set it to our CurrentDB create table def. And then I'm passing along one particular parameter here, which is tbl books, or I should say argument. This is actually what we call an argument. It's not really a parameter. Just as a point of clarification, on the actual method, within the method, we called them parameters when they are created inside of the method, but when you are passing along information to your method, it's actually considered an argument. And it's kind of splitting hairs here, but we're actually passing along the argument, a string argument of table books. So anyway, we're going to create a table in the CurrentDB create table def, and the table we're going to be creating is called table books. And we're setting that to that object in memory called tdef, which is a table def. Okay? Then what we need to do is we need to take all the fields that are in our tdef table definition, and we need to start appending fields to that table. And you can use within a tdef object, within a table def object, you can call the create field method, and the create field method is going to require the name of the field you want to create and what type. Okay, so we're going to append 3 fields to our table. Okay, we're going to append the ID field, we're going to append the book name, and we're going to append the author, because the table we're creating is a table of books. So there's the ID, book name, and the author. Notice we're setting DB text, and then we also need to pass in a length. Since this is a text field, we need to pass a length of the text that we're going to allow on the table. And so now we've got our 3 fields added to our tdef table definition. Now, one of the other things that we need to do is, remember this ID field, we like it to be auto-numbered. So we have it as a long, but we haven't said that it is auto-numbered. It isn't going to automatically increment by 1 each time that a new record is added, which is a pretty critical part of making a table, is that you need to have this unique key. So I'm going to go ahead and state that the attribute of the field called ID, so I'm looking inside of the table defs, inside the table def, and the field name is ID, and I'm setting one of its attributes to be DB auto increment field. Okay, and what that's going to do is that's going to set it so that that ID field would automatically increment by 1 each time. And then we go ahead and append it, and we're going to go ahead and append the table def that we have instantiated up here in our memory. We're going to add it now to our table defs, and then we're going to go ahead and refresh our table defs so that when we take a look at it here, now we can see that table books. We can see there's the ID field, which is going to automatically create a new number for us, and we can type in a book name. So let's see. And I don't know who the author is here, so someone. Okay, but you can see it automatically assigns the ID number of 1. Okay, so that's how you can create a table definition in VBA and add it to your database. Pretty neat stuff there. All right, so we're done with the books. Now we don't need to save that. All right. The last one we're going to talk about is the execute and records affected. Now the execute here, you can see, is going to be, well, let me first of all explain here. We're going to create an object in memory called DB, which is a type of database. and then we're going to set it to the current DB. That's kind of weird, huh? But if you think about it, what we're doing is we're just going to create a variable here in memory, an object in memory, and we're going to set it to the current DB, which is pretty cool. You can actually, it makes it so that we can, we don't have to necessarily access it through the current DB name. We can actually name it ourselves and then work with it. Pretty nice, huh? So that's what I'm going to do there. And then I'm going to go ahead and run the execute method on the DB object, which again is relating back to the current DB. And we will see that this is a similar thing to what we were looking at before when we were working with the query defs, is that I'm going to pass in a SQL query string that is an update query string, which is going to update table 1 employees and set the test field on there to added. So let's take a look here. I've got my employees table, and I added a field on here called test field, and right now there's nothing in it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and execute this update of the table 1 employees, and now we will find that within the table 1 employees, if I scroll over here to test field, added is now in every one of those records, in every one of those rows for the test field. All right, so that's what the update table 1 employees command did. And now what we're going to do is we can, after we've done an execute on the database, we can find out how many records were affected by that execute command. So we're going to actually print out to our window here, and let me just clear everything out here. We're going to send out to our debug with our debug print function. We're going to send to our immediate window the number of records that were affected by our db execute function there. And we see the affected records was 5. Let's take a look here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can kind of see, if we try to run this again, now that we've got all of these records already affected, what happens if I execute it again, do you think? We have the same number of records affected. Well, that's because this particular SQL statement doesn't care what was in there already. It's just going to go ahead and set it again. Whether there's something in there already or not, it's just going to go ahead and add this added word again. Let's do this just so you can see. It doesn't care whether or not there was something already inside of test field. It's going to go ahead and change it anyway. Oops. Try it one more time. There we go. So now again we have 5 affected records. And if we open up the 1 employees, we can see that it's been changed to edited. All right? So that's what you can do with the execute command. There are other things that we will be covering with the current DB object. More specifically, one thing that we will definitely be going over is the open record set command. This is something very similar. I'm just going to show you here real quick from table 1 employees. And then we have to specify DB open dyna set DBC changes. Okay, and I don't expect you to understand what all this is right now, but this is a way of basically opening up information from a table, and then we can actually go in VBA code and we can iterate through these records in this table and start to manipulate the data, which is really, really cool. I just wanted to show you this is a method on the current DB object that we will be seeing and using very, very frequently, but I just didn't want to go over it quite yet in this video because we're going to have a whole separate video just on this particular method.